Today's lesson is solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. Now here's what the quadratic formula looks like. It takes the form of negative b plus or minus, because there are two answers, the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There's no plus there. So, a quadratic equation always takes the form of a squared value. So a quadratic equation would look like this. X squared plus 8x plus 12 equals 0, and they want you to figure out what does x possibly mean. So the reason that it has two possible solutions is because when you graph a quadratic, if we made a table of values and graphed it out, it would take the form of something like that, called a parabola. That means x could be there and also there. So there are two values for x, one there and one there. So that's why we have two values. So that's why we do the whole thing once through with a plus. Then we do it all again with a minus. It is a nice simple method, simply using substitution. So your step number one. Step number one is list out A, B and C. So we're going to list out the A, B and C values. So in this particular one, the ax squared plus bx plus c. That's how it works. So the a is the value in front of the x squared. Now in this case, it's a 1 because there's nothing actually there. So how many x squareds do we have? Well, there's only one of them. So the a is 1. B is in front of the x. So B in this case is 8 and C is 12. Be very careful if these numbers are negative. So if there's a minus there, you need to say that it's negative 8. So we've got our numbers. Now we simply substitute them into the formula. So negative B would be so x equals negative b. We'll do it first through with a plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And then we'll secondly do it with a minus. So x equals negative b minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So we do it twice and we'll have two separate answers. Negative b will be negative 8. The square root of b squared, well b squared is 8 squared, minus, now the 4ac, I would recommend you always put it into a bracket, because especially if some of these are negative, it becomes all complicated. So 4 times a is 1 times c, which is 12, all over 2a's, 2 times 1, I'm doing it out super long for you. So we've got negative 8 plus the square root of 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times 1 is 4, 4 12s are 48, all over 2. Now you get your calculator and we've got to have our answers to two decimal places. So you've just got to be super careful when you're typing into your calculator, especially when you're doing the negative 8 squared. People always think, well, that'll get me the right answer. But it doesn't, because your calculator here is going to do BIDMAS. So it'll do the powers first. It'll do 8 squared and get 64. Then it will say, well, I want a negative version of that, so I want negative 64. But you know that negative 8 squared means negative 8 times negative 8, which will give you a positive answer. So when you're typing it in, you would have to open a bracket and say negative 8, all of negative 8, to be squared, and that'll give you 64. Okay, so we've got here 64. Here we are. So negative 8 squared is 64 plus the square root of, what's 64 minus 48? So we do 64 minus 48, and then we square root that answer is 4. Whoops, sorry. 64. 16, all over 2. So 64 plus, what's this, 4, makes 68 over 2. So our answer will be 34. So there's one answer. One answer is 34. The second answer, well, we've got to do the whole thing again, but with a minus. So negative b minus the square root of, now, because we've already done this, the bracket, negative b, the b squared minus 4ac, we know it comes to 16, the square root of 16. So negative 8 all over 2. Just type the whole thing in. So negative 8 minus square root of 16. Press equal so it does the whole of the top line. Divided by 2. And you get negative 6. So our answer here, is x equals 34 and minus 6. So we have two possible answers. So we know that that's where those would be. One would be crossing here at x is 34 and the other one at negative 6. That's what our two answers would be. Now your work today, that's all you have to do, is practicing those. But the worksheet does have these questions. Come and have a quick look. These ones here where it says find the two values. So that means all you've got to type into your calculator is 2 plus the square root of 3, all divided by 2. And also 2 minus the square root of 3 divided by 2. It's getting you practice at using your calculator. So here we are. So we type in 2 plus the square root of 3. Press equal so that you get the answer to that whole top line, because that big long line means divide everything on the top by 2. And you'll get your answer. So practice with those. Practice using your negative button for negative 10 minus, open your bracket, the square root of 160. Press equals all over 5. And it'll give you another answer. So you've got to get used to practicing with your calculator. Those ones want you to do an answer with plus and an answer with minus. Then you come on to using the actual formula. We've got 1. Remember, there's a 1 in front of a plain x, and then just substitute it into your formula. The sheet gives you the steps to do. Best of luck, and email me if you've got any questions.